Good midnight. You are listening to Exe Files, Paranormal Radio on Phonic FM 106.8. I'm your host, Alison Rockbrand, and I'm here with my co-host, Richard Freeman. Hello, Richard.
Hello, and hello, wireless listeners.
It is the witching hour, and you've just been listening to Death Party UK, Devil in the Woods. That was a song requested by Richard Freeman, who is our special guest today. He's going to be talking about the Mongolian Death Worm, amongst other interesting and intriguing cryptozoological events and things.
Doesn't it annoy you when a band in England has the same name as a band in America, so they always call them whatever UK?
Is
the
there
Mission? The Mission have to call themselves the Mission UK because there's a band called the Mission in the States, and the Mission were around years before. So there's a Death Party have been around for years. So why do they have to call themselves Death Party UK? That really gets on my goat.
So there's another band called Death Party.
There's a Death Party in the States, yeah.
And they were after Death Party UK.
I believe that to be the case.
Because, you know, something really weird happened to me once. Now, I used to have a theatre company called Travesty Theatre, and it was theatre of horror. And anyways, we produced for about 7 or 8 years, and then when I moved to the UK, I discovered that there was another theatre company called Travesty Theatre, but they produced, like, musicals and things totally unrelated to theatre of horror, and it really annoyed me, and they still exist, and it's still a confusion to this day.
Maybe you just have to go and kill them.
I might have to do that, but I think there's a lot of them. There's like a whole company. There's like 10 of them or something.
Well, you have to kill them with fire then.
However, I did look them up online, and their net worth is like minus £100. So I was like, thank you, goddess, for that. So I'm not that worried about it. But the name really annoys me. So I changed my company's name to Travesty Theatre Arts, which is a bit pretentious, but you know. I didn't really know what else to do. Okay, well, so have you got some news for us, Richard? I
have some news.
Take it away.
Are we ready, clocks? An 8-foot werewolf terrorises Hull.
Ooh.
7 separate witnesses claim to have spotted an 8-foot tall werewolf lurking in an abandoned industrial area just outside of the centre of Hull. Now, Hull frequents the top lists of worst place in Britain again and again and again. I've never been there, but it's always on the top of these lists of worst city in Britain. So why a werewolf would want to go to Hull is another matter. Residents think that the beast is a folkloric monster called Old Stinker. According to legend, the wolfman prowls the Yorkshire wolds and gains its name from a foul breath that it gets from digging up and eating rotting corpses. One woman saw the monster from a bridge. She said, "It stood upright one moment, and the next it was on all fours running like a dog. I was terrified. It bounded along on all fours, then it stopped and reared up on its back legs before running down the embankment towards the water. It vaulted 30 feet over to the other side, vanished up the embankment and over a wall into some allotments. A couple saw something tall and hairy eating an Alsatian next to a drain. They stopped to get a closer look and saw it jump an 8-foot fence and vanish into the night with its prey still in its jaws. A woman walking her dog saw a creature that she describes as half man and half dog, and her own dog started shaking and refused to go any further. Local councillor Steve Wilson has offered to keep a log of sightings. Locals plan to hunt the beast on the next full moon. How long before it seeks human prey? That's my question. Sasquatch sighting in Pennsylvania. At 11 p.m. on Mud Pike, a road in Fayette County, Pennsylvania, 2 eyewitnesses had a bizarre encounter on the night of May the 11th this year, whilst driving through the rain and fog. About halfway down Mud Pike, the driver saw something large and hairy cross the road on 2 legs. He didn't get a clear view of the creature and slowed the car down. Both him and the passenger tried to get a better look of whatever it was by shining a torch through the woods, but they couldn't see it. Suddenly, another creature emerged from the woods from the left-hand side and crossed the road about 20 feet from the car. The driver slammed on the brakes and stopped only about 10 feet from the monster. It was about 7 feet tall, upright, with arms hanging well below the hips. It stood staring right at the car with 2 eyes glowing bright red. It was covered in long dark hair. The hair was so long that no facial features besides the eyes could be seen. The driver put the car into reverse and slowly backed away from the creature. The Sasquatch took a couple of steps forward as the car backed up, and the creature continued to walk to it. The driver put the car in low and began to move towards the creature. At this point, it put its hands on the bonnet, and they noticed that the palms were hairless. Then the beast removed its hands and walked away into the woods. The car was later examined for handprints, but the heavy rain had washed any evidence away.
Oh, thank you very much. I think one thing is, if I was a werewolf, you were saying why Hull, but I mean, where else is it going to go? I mean, maybe it can't go anywhere else. It's like Castle Dracula. It's like up on a hill. It's like in this village, in the middle of nowhere village in Romania. It's like, where else is Dracula going to live, right?
The interesting thing is that werewolves in legend are indistinguishable from actual real wolves. There were people that transform themselves into 4-footed wolves that were just like every other wolf, except they had a human mind. But the actual wolf man, the wolf human hybrid, is a creation of Hollywood. Before that, werewolves ran around on all fours and just looked like ordinary wolves. So it's interesting that modern reports, and you get quite a few of them from places like Bray Road in Wisconsin, with the Beast of Bray Road and the Dog Man and other things. They're always these wolf-human hybrids like you get in fiction.
Well, that's what I'm saying. These are obviously like maybe someone with some kind of deformity, or I don't know, just super hairy person who has been kicked out of the rest of society. Nobody wants them around. They're just too hairy. Maybe they have lice, and everyone's freaked out. So they say to themselves, I'm going to move to where can I go where no one will care. Hull, I'm going there. That's the worst place in the UK. Again and again every year, and that's where I'm going.
The wife of an ex-friend of mine once told me that she was out walking in it's North Devon or North Cornwall. I think it was North Cornwall one evening, and she met a man who he looked like he had hypertrichosis. He was covered in hair, but also he had jutting jaws. He had like prognathous jaws that jutted out, and he looked just like a Hollywood werewolf. And he was there with his brother, and his brother said he had this deformity, and he only ever came out at night because people are always staring at him.
Well, that's it. By the way, just to wrap this up, there was a TV show which I think I told you about, Richard, but which people might want to check out because it is kind of interesting. It's a TV show about the worst towns in Britain. and it's really scary. I mean, it's real horror. It's these really strange people with. There's one place where they have like a leak competition every year for the biggest leak, and people like murder each other over the leaks, and they like poison each other's gardens and each other's dogs and each other's wives, and they murder each other's families over these giant leaks. And I can't remember what the town is now, but check it out. It's the kinds of towns that werewolves live in.
Maybe it's not a werewolf, it's a were-rabbit.
Ooh, well, it definitely could be. So Richard Freeman, of course, our co-host on the show, but also cryptozoologist and author in his own right, of the Center for Fortean Zoology, and you are associated to their how again? I can't remember.
Yeah, I am the zoological director of the Centre for Fortean Zoology, or for short, CFZ.
Right, so you can check out Richard's stuff and other stuff at the CFZ at their website at www.cfz.org.uk, and there's lots of interesting stuff to check out on there. Richard also has various publications which you can check out online. Richard, do you want to tell us about one or two of those? Yeah,
I've got a number of books. Dragons More Than a Myth, which looks at dragon legends worldwide and modern day sightings of dragon-like creatures. Explore Dragons, which is about the folklore of dragons specifically in Britain. The Great Yokai Encyclopedia, which is a encyclopedia of ghosts and monsters in Japanese folklore, which are truly bizarre and include pigs that steal your genitals, cats that reanimate the dead, monsters that eat hair, dogs with shape-shifting testicles, and other things as well.
Wow.
Orang Pendek, Sumatra's Forgotten Ape, which is about my various expeditions to Sumatra looking for a new species of upright walking ape. And I also have two horror anthologies out, Green Unpleasant Land, which is 25 short stories about British horror, and Hyaku Monogatari, which is a book of Japanese horror stories.
Fantastic. And these can be found on Amazon, is that right?
Yeah, and I suppose you could also order them from most good bookshops, and probably from most crap bookshops as well.
Well, thank you very much. Now, you've talked before on the show about your expeditions. You talked about the recent one in which you came back from just recently, looking for the wolf, is it? The
Tasmanian wolf.
Yeah, the Tasmanian wolf. And so that was fascinating. So we thought that you should talk a bit more about some other expeditions. And I thought, why not the Mongolian Death Worm? Because you haven't talked about that yet. So you have been on an expedition, which you're going to talk about a little bit later, looking for it to Mongolia. But why don't you talk a little bit about its background, what it exactly is?
Well, it was largely unknown in the West. My colleague Carl Schuker, another cryptozoologist and author, he was one of the people instrumental in getting it more widely known in Britain. And the late and sorely missed Czech cryptozoologist Ivan Merkelé, who went over there on several expeditions in the 1990s. He was the first Westerner really to research this creature in years and years and years. It first filtered through to the West way back in the 1930s, in the 1920s and the 1930s, with a guy called Roy Chapman Andrews, but his books were largely forgotten, and it wasn't until Ivan rediscovered these books and started to hit the trail again that the spark of interest of the death worm was reignited in the West. Now, Roy Chapman Andrews was a paleontologist. He studied fossils, and quite famously Indiana Jones is based on him, although Indiana Jones was an archaeologist, not a paleontologist. But he looked and behaved passably similar to Indiana Jones, and he went out into Mongolia in the 1920s on a series of expeditions, and he wrote a book about it called On the Trail of Ancient Man, because he was looking for the fossils of the ancestors of human beings, but the strata was completely the wrong age, way too old. But what he did discover was lots and lots of dinosaur eggs. He discovered the first dinosaur eggs, most of them laid by a dinosaur called Protoceratops, and he found these in virtually intact nests all together, and they had the embryos, fossilized embryos, still in them, and that's what he's best known for. But he mentions in the book that the premier of Mongolia asked him while he was out there to look for the death worm. Now, in Mongolian they call it the Alroy Hoi Hoi, which translates as intestine worm, because they say it looks like a great length of cow's intestine, and it's supposed to come up to the surface after rain, and also in the hottest periods, which are generally around about June. And Roy Chapman Andrews didn't really believe any of this, and the Prime Minister of Mongolia gave him a pair of sunglasses to protect himself from its deadly emanations, and some tweezers to tackle it with, or rather tongs to grab this thing with. Of course, he didn't really look for it. He just said he was going to. But he was more or less the first person to write about it. It was mentioned in another book called The Wind's Path, which was even earlier and much more obscure, but very few people.
So was it supposed to have kind of the evil eye or something?
Well, the stories about the death worm, when they re-emerge in the West, make it sound like a monster worthy of Doctor Who. They say it's blood red, about as thick as your arm, about 5 feet long, and it can generate blasts of electricity like an electric eel, and it can also spit a corrosive yellow saliva that acts like acid. And there was a story of a camel treading on one once and collapsing dead because it had been electrocuted by the death worm. And there was another story about a geologist poking a theodolite around in a sand dune, suddenly convulsing and falling down dead, and his colleagues saw a death worm crawling away into the sand dunes. So it's supposed to have all these grotesque powers, and the Mongolians go in very great fear of it. But when actually you get over there, the story is something entirely different.
I see.
Now, I went over there in 2005. There was 4 of us, myself, a guy called John Hare, a guy called Dave Churchill, and a veteran of our expeditions. God, my mind has gone completely blank now, and he'll hate me for it if he ever hears it. Oh God, what was his name? I hate it when this happens. Anyway, there were 4 of us. We went over there, and we arranged earlier with a company called emongol.com, and they were a very, very good company. They were a tourist company, but they got everything really up and running before we got there, and we sent them a bunch of posters, well, a design for posters, which they changed into Mongolian, saying that a group of scientists would be coming through the area in May of that year looking for the death worm. If anyone had got any information or they got a specimen, please contact us. And they went and distributed these to remote settlements in the Gobi Desert. Now, the settlements out there, they have the equivalent to British counties. They're things called sums, but a sum can be the size of a small country because Mongolia is vast. It's like something like 3/4 the size of Europe. It's enormous, and the population is something like 1 million, and most of those are in the 2 cities Ulaanbaatar and Dalanzagad, and the nomads just live in either on their own in the circular tents, which they call gurs, or little collections of gurs, little villages. Sometimes they have houses and villages that are more solid, but generally they're in gurs. So they went out and distributed these to a number of some centres, and then we went over there and met them. And the thing is run by a guy called Byamba. emongol.com is run by a guy called Byamba, and we met him in Ulaanbaatar, and we had 2 guides, Bill Gay and Togra. And oftentimes on these expeditions, you go looking for one thing, but you turn up stories about something else as well, which is equally interesting. And this has happened in Russia and in West Africa and Sumatra. Everywhere I go, you hear about other things that you weren't actually looking for at the time, but they're just as interesting. And we spent a couple of days in Ulaanbaatar getting everything ready before we hit the road, and one of Bayamba's friends told us a story about his aunt, and his aunt had told him something that occurred to her just after World War II in a remote area of northern Mongolia. Northern Mongolia is mountainous and you get lakes and forests, and then the southern part is the Gobi Desert. This was up in the north, and she told him that she'd seen a dead dragon frozen in a river one particularly harsh winter. And I thought, oh well, maybe this is going to be a big sturgeon or something that they found in the river. But her description was something of snake-like and 100 feet in length, and they could see just the top of it, the scales sticking up out of the water. And apparently this is a very hard winter, and they survived by eating the flesh of this creature all winter, and then come the spring, the thaws washed the bones and what was left of it away. So if there's any truth to this story, it makes you wonder what on earth it is. And dragons are called Lu in Mongolian, and they're supposed to reside in the heavens, and they come to earth to bring rain with them, and that's called Lu Hang when they bring rain. But we were going to hear more about this later on as we got deeper into the desert. Anyway, our transport were these two old Soviet vans that have been turned into minibuses. They look like they were ex-military, but they were quite sturdy things. And we went out into the desert, and you imagine a desert as being all sand, but the Gobi Desert is bizarre because it's some bits of it are sandy, but other bits are mica. They're all chips of mica, so it looks like a mirror. There's an area that they call the mirror because it's all reflective. Other bits look like cat litter trays that stretch off into eternity. Other bits look like the surface of Mars. It's very strange, and you can drive for days and days and days and not only not see another human being, but not see signs of another human being. It's the most remote and the most alien place I've ever been to. And before we went out, we visited the museum in Ulaanbaatar, where they've got a great collection of dinosaurs, and we were told that some German tourists at a place called Long Red Mountain had found some dinosaur eggs the year before. So that if you go to Long Red Mountain, look out for dinosaur eggs.
And so is the worm mainly supposed to be found in the desert itself?
Yes, it burrows beneath the sand, and it's supposed to come up after rainfall and in the very hot months. So our plan was to find oases and try and dam any streams to make little localised floods and force the creature to the surface. That was the plan. Anyway, we met with some more witnesses on our way out, and we met with a man who's 90, and he'd seen it back in 1930 and described it as being about 2 feet long, sausage-like, reddy brown and scaly, and it was just lying there and slightly moving from side to side. He couldn't tell which end was the head and which end was the tail, but it badly frightened him because he'd heard all these stories.
Right, but it's only 2 feet long though, this thing, and you're saying it's the thickness of an arm.
Yeah.
So it's because
he said it was about 4 inches thick.
Okay, because it doesn't sound that frightening. Like it's not like an anaconda or because
no.
like those are much scarier.
It's a case of Mongolian whispers, because we get these stories of a creature 5 feet long that spits acid and generates
the spitting acid is the interesting part, I think.
Generates blasts of electricity. But when we talked to the witnesses, they called it throwing lightning, the electricity, and they said that's just folklore, it doesn't do that. But they believed it was poisonous and it could spit, but nobody had ever seen anyone that had been killed by one of these things. One guy had heard a story about a little girl that goaded one with a stick and got spat at and died, but he didn't. It was just a friend of a friend story. Another guy said they'd got a dead one once and they put it on a copper plate and the plate all turned green when it decayed. Another person had got a dead one and they wrapped it in several animal hides, and the worm shriveled up and the hides all turned green. We talked fairly early on. We talked to another guy out in the desert. We found him because they'd lined up some witnesses for us, like they said we were going to do. And then we went to this guy's ger, and he said he'd also seen it as a boy. This guy looked like he was about 60. He'd seen it as a young boy when he was tending his families, flocks of goats and camels, and he said once again it was just lying there in the desert. It was reddish brown, about 2 feet long, sausage shaped. He knew what it was and he was terrified. He went and told his parents, and they packed their gear up and just moved the family and the whole animals out of the area. That's for the amount of fear this thing can generate.
Could it be, I mean, snakes are venomous, obviously, so I mean, could it be a snake that has a lot of venom and potentially spitting venom rather than biting?
Well, I came to some conclusions at the end of after listening to all these the people and their description. I came to some conclusions about what it was, and I'll tell you a bit later. Anyway, we went further into the desert, and one of our drivers, we had 2 drivers as well, he said when he was in the area about a year ago, he'd come across a well that had been locked up, and he asked the local people, why is the well locked up? And they said that an old man had seen a dragon enter the well, and they locked it up because they were frightened. And some government officials came by and said this is nonsense, and they opened the well up and poured oil down it to prove that it was nonsense. And so the story goes that within a few weeks 2 of the men were dead with no explanation of how they died, and another one was struck impotent. And we talked to an old woman whose ger was quite near to this well. We saw the well. It wasn't very big, this well, at all. But she said she'd never seen the dragon, but she'd heard that it's supposed to be rainbow coloured, and she believed it existed, and she'd talked to the old man that had seen it going into the well. Anyway, we would move from place to place, from some centre to some centre, and then out into the more remote areas. And in each of these areas, the governor of the Sun would come and meet us as if we were like some sort of important officials, and then he'd take us to see some of the witnesses, and then we'd go further out into the desert to talk to the more remote ones. And we would made camp once when 2 guys came up on a motorbike, and it turned out that one of these guys was a ranger in the Gobi Desert National Park, and the guy with him had seen the death worm 3 times, and the ranger's wife had seen it as well. So they invited us back to stay at their ger. And the guy that'd seen it 3 times, once he'd seen one of them grab and devour a mouse, and another time he'd seen one slithering in and out of a hole in the desert, and a 3rd time he'd actually killed one by throwing a stone at it because he was frightened. And he said that Russian officials were in the area collecting snakes at the time, and they took the corpse away. So it could be that in some Russian museum they've got a specimen of a death worm, but they don't know what it is. Now this happens more times than you think. There are unidentified specimens that turn up in museum collections, and they turn out to be something amazing. A few years ago in a natural history museum in Paris, a whacking great lizard over 3 feet long, a big chunky thing, a stuffed one, was on display, and it was a gecko, and they'd lost all the paperwork to go with it, so they didn't know where it came from, what it was. And it just so happened that a gecko expert came through, saw it, and his jaw hit the floor because it was bigger than any other gecko, and he recognised it as something completely unknown to science. And he worked out, by looking at the features of it, that it probably came from New Zealand. And it's been called Delcourt's giant gecko, and it's no one's seen a live one yet, but this incredible thing was just found sitting in a museum. So these things like this do happen.
Wow, bizarre.
Anyways, the ranger's wife said she'd been out with her son in a saxel forest. Saxel is this plant that grows in these short forests out in the desert, and she had seen one of these things emerging from a hole, and her son had thrown a stone at it, and it had gone back into the hole, and she was badly frightened by it. So we stayed in their guest ger, which was a ger set up for any guests they have. They're a very, very hospitable people, the Mongolians. They have to be, because of the climate they live in, the harsh climate. And oftentimes you'll find gers stocked up with food, water and firewood just left there in case anybody's lost in the desert and they come across them, and it'll save their lives. And we were told a story of a haunted ger, about 2 travellers that come across this ger, and they're lost in the desert. They go into it and they're playing cards, and the door keeps opening and there's nobody there, and one fella keeps bolting it again, and it opens again, and then he sees a woman come in a long red deal, which is a long coat, but only one guy can see it, the other guy can't. And then this woman tries to strangle this guy, and he ends up kicking the table with the cards over, and the other guy then wonders what the hell's going on, and the woman just vanishes. That was just a weird ghost story we heard around a fire one day.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to have a little bit more when we come back after our break. We're going to be listening to a couple of tunes now. One which Richard has requested, which is just let me get my. Well, there it is. The Automatic Monster. I'm pretty sure we've played this before, and I'm sure we played Death Party UK as well. But we're playing it again because they're great songs, and of course it is related to our theme of monsters and other strange cryptozoological beings. We have another song after that from the band Husbands and Knives. This is the Ballad of Lucifer, which is I chose this one especially for you, Richard, because it is a song about a hamster named Lucifer, and I thought that you would like it since you like things like that. It is by the band Husbands and Knives, and this is Lou Hotchkiss Knives, who is the lead singer for this band, and she's going to be on the program on our program on June the 10th. So this is a little bit of a preview of her music, their music. And it is about a hamster named Lucifer, which is just cool. We like stuff like that. So we are going to listen to that and be back in a couple of minutes.
monster? Is it a monster? What's that coming over the hill? Is it a monster? Is it a monster? What's that coming over the hill? Is it a monster? Is it a monster? What's that coming over
best toys, but you can't take your hamster. Screw that, you really thought. Mom is pretty lame. I don't care, 'cause Lucifer is coming on that plane.
Live and local from the heart of Exeter, this is Phonic FM.
Good midnight, it is the witching hour and you are listening to Exe Files, Paranormal Radio on Phonic FM 106.8 in Exeter and www.phonic.fm online. I'm your host Alison Rockbrand and I'm here with my co-host Richard Freeman. Hello Richard.
Hello and hello wireless listeners.
You've just been listening to The Automatic Monster and Husbands and Knives, Ballad of Lucifer, about a hamster named Lucifer. We are going to be having some members of Husbands and Knives on the program, on our program on June the 10th to talk about the occult and things like that, which are themes throughout their music, so that should be interesting. Check that out on June the 10th, and if you want to know more about Husbands and Knives, you can check out their Bandcamp page. It is hang on a sec. There we go. husbandsandknives.bandcamp.com, and you can check them out. They've got other music on there, and they are great. Now, we have just been talking to Richard Freeman, co-host of the show, but also cryptozoologist from the Centre for Fortean Zoology. You can check that page out at www.cofz.org.uk. And he has just been telling us about his trip to Mongolia in search of the Mongolian Death Worm. So, go on, Richard.
It was Chris Clark.
I knew it was going to come back.
I forgot it was Chris Clark.
I knew it was going to come back.
How can I forget him? I had a blank about his name for some reason, and he's been on more expeditions than anybody else.
Oh, that reminds me. We were just in the studio here. We were just watching the video for The Automatic Monster, and it's a great video. You should really watch it because it has a bunch of people wandering in the woods looking for, I guess, Bigfoot. And Richard said it's exactly like us at the Centre for Fortean Zoology, except we're all fatter. So yeah, check it out. It's a great video. So Richard, you were telling us about different people's stories about the Mongolian Death Worm and its acid spitting and electrifying capabilities.
Yes. Yeah, there was another story of a man. Once again, this was something that someone had heard, they'd not seen, of a man on a horse that prodded one of these things with a horse goad. and supposedly the venom leapt up from the creature along the horse goad and killed both the rider and the horse. And that's almost exactly like stories of basilisks in Europe, where if you speared one on a horseback, the venom would jump up the spear and kill both the horse and the rider. And I personally think these stories are apocryphal. The nomads themselves say that it doesn't generate electricity, that they believe it's poisonous and it can spit, but not one of them had known anybody that had seen one of these spitting or been killed by anybody. They just heard friend of a friend of a friend stories. Even the people that had seen them, most of the stories we got were the creatures just lying there doing absolutely nothing.
But doesn't have a place in folklore? I mean, other than stories about it spitting acid and electrifying people, does it have like a totem? Is it a totem? Are there other stories in the folklore? Is it associated to anything? Does it have any other properties?
Well, when Ivan Merkeley, the Czech cryptozoologist, was over there, he met a shaman. And the shaman said that this thing isn't a flesh and blood animal. It's a spirit of the desert, and if you go poking it into it and looking for it, it will come for you. And some nights later, he was lying in his tent at night, and he had a terrible dream, a nightmare of this thing exploding out of a moonlit sand dune and attaching itself like a huge leech to his back and sucking at him. And he woke up and he had this massive blister on his back, and then afterwards he had a heart attack and had to go home. But I think
that's strange.
I think that was coincidence more than anything else. But we moved on to other areas, and there are loads of relics of the Soviet era and the socialist area. There's one place we stopped at which was at a massive old watchtower that was just now rusting away in the desert because it was unused, and we stopped at a military outpost because we were quite near the borders of China where we were, and one time we were stopped by these gun wielding border guards who just wanted to know who we were and where we were going, and we told them, and they said, "Oh, we heard all about this on the radio," and they were like pleased to meet us. I think their job was quite boring, and they pointed out these hills in the distance and said, "Oh, that's China just over there." So we were like walking distance of China. And we stopped at this old military base, which was really sort of Soviet bloc architecture, and it, once again falling apart. They had our training equipment there that was just rusting away in the desert, and they had a little skeleton staff that was mainly old retired soldiers and their families, and a really nice little dog called Mimi. And there was a retired colonel there, and he was saying that in 1973 he'd seen the Death Worm when he was out on patrol just after dawn. He saw what he thought was a section of tyre in the lying in the sand, and he drove over to it, and he saw it was a death worm, and he said it was glistening, and he thinks it was the dew on its scales, and he thinks that's where the idea of it generating electricity comes from, because it had this sparkling effect on its scales when they were damp. And he drove away to get a camera, but of course when he came back it was gone. And he told another story about another soldier finding one of them in a store once. They had a food store, and he found one of these things coiled up in there as well, and was absolutely terrified. Now, the night we stopped at this military outpost, there was torrential rain. We're British, so wherever we go it rains. We go to the Atacama Desert, it rains. We'll go anywhere, it rains. Where it hasn't rained for hundreds of years, it will rain. But there was a big thunderstorm, quite a spectacular one, and we went out the day after to see if we could find anything, because the death worm is supposed to emerge after rainfall, but other than some scorpions we found very little. So we moved on again, and we came to one of the distant oases, and this one was called Wall Canyon, and there was a stream running through it and vegetation around it. And initially, like I said earlier, we were planning to try and dam one of these streams to make a little localised flood to try and force the death worm to the surface, but unfortunately the stream itself was down in a crevasse, so you wouldn't be able to dam it. It would the size of the crevasse would be too high. They were about 10-12 feet high. You could walk down to it and walk alongside the stream, but the walls of it were too high to flood the surrounding desert. And at night, in the walls of the crevasse were alive with these strange burning green eyes. I mean, what on earth are these things? There were hundreds of them, and they looked quite large, but when we got over there, they were little tiny geckos, a sort of gecko called Przewalski's gecko, and their eyes glowed green in the dark and looked very eerie and strange. So the whole flooding thing never happened, but while we were there, we got covered in ticks. In Sumatra, we got covered in leeches and picked 100 off them off our legs between three of us one night. And in Mongolia it was ticks, and the moment you stop, they all emerge from the sand and come scuttling towards you. And I had one on the back of my leg, up the back of my neck, up and down my legs. John Hare had one on his unmentionables at one point.
So I guess you've become experts at taking them off.
Yes,
then.
yeah.
Well.
You have to twist them in a certain way, or you can put a drop of oil on them so they can't breathe, and then they'll
really oil on them.
take their,
because I know we have them in Devon, and I know they're quite dangerous. You can get ill from them, and Lyme disease is it, and so I'm quite afraid of them. I've gotten one once, and I was really freaked out. And I was like, I've got Lyme disease, and I had to watch it every day in the shower and make sure it wasn't getting inflamed. And
well, I really dislike ticks. I don't mind leeches. Leeches don't bother me in the least, but ticks are much nastier. Much nastier. Another place we stopped was this place called Long Red Mountain. It was so called because it's a mountain, it's red and it's long. And this was the place where there's supposed to be dinosaur eggs. And I was wandering around the side of this mountain on my own at one point, and I saw a perfect fossilised egg, about the size of a hen's egg, but it was so well fossilised you could see the little cracks in it. I thought, that's brilliant, I'll take that back to the museum in Ulaanbaatar. I picked it up and it disintegrated in my hand because it was desiccated camel dung, and it looked exactly like an egg. Anyway, I was talking earlier about being in the guest Ger with I got a bit ahead of myself with other stories. We're in this guest Ger with the park ranger and his wife who'd seen the death worm.
This is the haunted Ger.
No. The haunted Ger was a story we heard. Okay. This was the Ger where the guy on the motorbike had approached us, and he was a park ranger, and his friend had seen the death worm 3 times, and his wife had seen, and we were their guests, and they had this fermented mare's milk, which would taste like a fizzy alcoholic yogurt. So I had a couple of bowls of that to be polite, and a guy called Dave Churchill had got his laptop with him, and he got lots of pictures of the sea, and these guys had never seen the sea. It's a landlocked place. So they all gathered round to see it, all the extended family, and they were fascinated, and they were looking at it all night. And there was an adorable little girl, rosy-cheeked and with pigtails and really sweet, and her parents kept trying to take her to bed, but she'd come back, and in the end they just let her stay up all night. And I mentioned the next day to our main guide, Bill Gay. I said, well, what a sweet little girl that was. And he said, oh, it's not a girl, it's a boy. I said, no, it's nice. It's a girl, it's a little girl, look, she's got pigtails and everything. And there's no, the nomads raise their children all as girls until they're 4 years old, and then the boys go through the transition into manhood and have their pigtails cut. And he said, if you don't believe me, look at this. And he grabbed this poor kid and pulled his pants down, and he was indeed a boy.
It's a strange story.
Anyway, where was I? Yes, we
so you were going to tell us a big reveal about what you think the death worm actually is.
But I've got another story before that. We went out into this Saxel forest where the old lady had seen, and her son had seen, the death worm. And one of the things you hear about in the literature of the death worm is that there's a parasitic plant called the goyo, and it's parasitic on the roots of the Saxel plant, and it brings forth a spectacular. We saw the flowers, and the flowers have these they're like phallic red buds, and they open out into lots and lots of little purple flowers that look a little bit like tiny lupins. And you hear that the root of this is deadly poisonous, and maybe this is where the death worm gets its poison from. And I asked the nomads about that. I said, it's not poisonous, no, it's edible. we eat it all the time. And this old woman dug up a saxel root, and it's a hideously ugly yellow gnarled thing. But I ate it, and it was delicious. If you can imagine something that has the texture of celery but tastes like banana, it was delicious. Where the idea this is poisonous from, I don't know. Anyway, I was out in this saxel forest when my stomach started to rumble, and I realised it was from this fermented mare's milk I had the night before. So I had to go behind a bush really quickly, and just then a sandstorm blew up. Now, we encountered a number of sandstorms out there, and it's like being in aggressive, abrasive fog. And I managed to have explosive diarrhea in the middle of a sandstorm.
Wow.
Thankfully, it was blowing away from me.
Thanks for all these great stories. This whole trip, I'm getting this kind of view of it is kind of like this big cartoon of all these really strange, cartoonish things happening.
That wasn't the worst. Another place, we stopped at several of these oases, these really remote oases, and because the creature is always found where there's water. We stopped at another one, and we'd set up camp, and we were looking out into the desert, and there was a little twister building in the desert, and I said, oh look, there's a little whirlwind out there in the desert, and it was getting bigger and bigger and coming closer and closer, and we thought it was going to go the other side of the valley. Then all of a sudden it was on us, and it was a full-blown whirlwind, and I was crouching down beside one of these vans, and I remember looking up into the eye of the storm, and all the debris being spun round and round, and suddenly I see one of the drivers going past holding one of the tents in mid-air, sort of horizontally being spun round and round and round like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. And it only lasted a few seconds and then it was gone, but it completely wrecked the camp, destroyed it, and we had to use backup tents.
Yeah, I'm imagining all of these stories as like a big cartoon in my mind.
It was the strangest expedition we ever went on to, and to the most wonderful place I've ever been in Mongolia. And
I mean, the death worm itself seems quite cartoonish, really. It seems like, this sort of inert form which then spews out venom and or electricity. So even that kind of has a cartoonish sort of edge to it. We were in another
one of these sums once in a village in one of these sums, and a feast was thrown for us by the man who did the head of the sum, and we met an old man there who'd seen the death worm way back in the 19th century. He was over 100, and he'd seen it as a young boy back in the 19th century. And once again, describing it's 2 feet long, brownish red, lying in the desert, terrifying. And the head of the sum, we were talking to him about the various stories we heard, and he said that there's a place called Bulgan Sum, which we subsequently went to, that a couple of years ago a doctor had been visiting there, because you have doctors go out to the Sum and they have to go around all these people maybe once a year, and he went to draw water out of a well and saw a dragon in the well. So we have a dragon in a well again, and he said that it had a long serpentine body and a face like a horse or a camel. And this was a doctor, an educated man, and subsequently we went on to Bulgan Sum, but the head man wasn't there, and this was a travelling doctor, and we never did find out his name or where he came from.
Strange. So we have a few minutes left, so tell us, give us the big reveal. Tell us, what do you think it is then?
I think that the death worm is an undiscovered species of very large Amphisbaena. Amphisbaenas are worm lizards. They're these strange sausage-shaped burrowing reptiles. They're not snakes and they're not lizards, but they're related to both of them. They look like elongate living sausages, or, to be honest, some of them look like huge animated willies, to be honest with you. They're a very poorly studied and very a very unknown group of animals. Very little is known about them, and they take their name from a mythological serpent, the Amphisbaena, which had a head at either end. Amphisbaenas have these round, blunt heads, and their tails are round and blunt as well, and they'll move their tails about so a predator will attack the tail instead of the head, which is more vulnerable, and they can get away. I think the death worm is a very large, unknown species of Amphisbaena, and Amphisbaenas are utterly harmless. They could give you a fair old nip, but they're not poisonous, they don't generate electricity, they don't spit venom or acid. This is called the This is called the no, I can't even say it now, it's too late at night.
Mythologizing?
Yes, that thing. Process.
Interesting.
And there's a snake in Sudan, in Africa, that is known as the apris, and the people there are so terrified of it. They say it's so venomous that it doesn't even have to bite you. You only even just have to touch it, and you'll drop down dead from the poison. And in fact, the apris is nothing more than a sand boa, a harmless little constricting snake that's not poisonous at all, is not dangerous to anything other than mice. In Pakistan, they have something called the bis cobra, or the bis adder, and they think it has 20 times the power, the 20 times the killing power of a king cobra. And it's just a tokay gecko. It can give you a fair old nip, but it's not venomous. And I think the same thing, this mythologized? No, it's too late at night. This process has happened again with the death worm. I think it's utterly harmless, but all these stories get attached to it that it can spit venom, it's has a acidic saliva, it can generate electricity. Gorillas, we all know about gorillas. At one time they thought gorillas would carry off native girls and rape them, or tear branches from trees and beat elephants to death. So these stories build up, but it doesn't mean to say that the actual creature itself isn't real.
Interesting. Well, thank you very much
Mytholization,
for that.
the mytholization process. Mytholization. There, I've said it.
Okay, we all know, we all understand mytholization, and everyone at home can say it together with us, which they probably just did. Thank you very much, and very interesting stories and interesting information about the Mongolian Death Worm. Local people to Exeter, if you are interested, Richard is going to be giving another talk on the Mongolian Death Worm, which he told me earlier will be in much more detail at the local pagan moot in Exeter, and you can check that out on Facebook at our group called Devon Pagan Communities. If you are interested in that, please do so. Richard, tell us about who's on next week.
Next week is Rob Gandy, and Rob Gandy will be talking about the Phantom Hitchhiker, this story you hear again and again about strange ghostly figures appearing in the backs of cars, even on motorbikes. Sometimes they're picked up from the side of the road and the people think it's a real flesh and blood hitchhiker and they just vanish, or even more creepily, people are driving through an area of moorland or some remote place, they look in the mirror and see some strange figure sitting in the back of their car.
So that's next week. Do check us out. Return to our show. Don't be mythologized away from us. Be mythologized into us. And we are sending out those vibes now. Now, turn in next week. And we have one more song for you. We have Frank Zappa, Dirty Love. And we will see you next week. Farewell.
Give me your dirty love, like you might surrender to some dragon in your dreams. Give me your dirty love, like a pink donation to the dragon in your dreams. I don't need your sweet devotion, I don't want your cheap emotion.
Whip me up some dragon lotion for your dirty love. Your dirty love.
Give me your dirty love, like some tacky little pamphlet in your daddy's bottom drawer. Give me your dirty love. I don't believe you've never seen his book before. I don't need no consolation, I don't want your reservation. I only got one destination, and that's your dirty love. Your dirty love. your mama make a fuzzy poodle do. Give me your dirty love, the way your mama make that nasty poodle chew. I'll ignore your cheap aroma and your little Bo Peep diploma.
I'll just put you in a coma with some dirty dog. Some dirty dog. That dirty dog. That dirty dog.
The poodle bites.
Come on, French.
The poodle chews is snappy. The poodle bites.
Come on, French.
The poodle chews is
Snap it.
The poodle bites.
Come on, French.
The poodle chews is
Snap it.
poodle bites.
Come on, French.
Poodle chews.
Not a speck of cereal.
Poodle bites.
Come on, French.
Poodle chews.
Nothing but the best for my dog.